Hello and welcome. Today we delve into one of the most pivotal moments of World War II, a battle that could have changed the course of history itself. It's December 22nd, 1944, and the grim cold air of the Ardennes hides a confrontation that will test the limits of courage, strategy, and sheer audacity. But what if I told you that on that frozen battlefield, a small group of American soldiers faced not only a formidable enemy with over 30,000 troops and nearly 1,000 tanks, but also the impossible, a last-minute plan so daring it seemed almost unbelievable. Have you ever wondered how a handful of soldiers, cut off and outnumbered, could stand their ground against overwhelming odds? Did you know that just days earlier, the Germans launched a surprise attack with over 410,000 troops and 1,856 artillery pieces, catching the Allies off guard at dawn? Or that amidst this chaos, General Patton made a vow to move an entire army through the icy terrain faster than anyone believed possible? A promise that would reshape the entire war. And what about the secret preparations behind the German offensive? Moving hundreds of tanks and thousands of soldiers through dense forests under cover of night, aiming for a critical road junction at Bastogne. Can you imagine the tension as American divisions, inexperienced and exhausted, faced the thunder of German artillery in the early hours of that December morning? How did the Germans manage to pull off a surprise attack on such a well-defended front, and what was their true objective? Was the capture of Bastogne merely a strategic move, or part of a larger, more desperate gamble to reach the port of Antwerp? All these pieces form a deadly puzzle, but the biggest question remains: how did a small group of defenders in an audacious plan turn the tide of a battle that seemed lost? This film will take you through the chaos, the courage, and the calculated risks that define this historic clash. We'll separate fact from fiction, uncover secrets, and reveal the shocking truths behind the Battle of the Bulge. The story begins now, and what happened next would become one of the most legendary moments in military history. December 22nd, 1944. A day carved into the annals of history with its cold, biting air, and the gravity of impending conflict. At precisely 11:30 in the morning, in the small Belgian town of Bastogne, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Card stood amidst a bleak, snow-covered battlefield, his breath forming fleeting clouds in the frigid air as he observed a group of 4 German officers approaching through the thick, frozen snow. Their uniforms contrasted sharply with the desolate, war-ravaged landscape around them, and they carried a stark white flag that fluttered faintly in the cold breeze. This insignia of surrender, however, was merely a symbol wrapped in arrogance, a message that would resonate through generations, demanding unconditional capitulation from the encircled American forces. The message was cloaked in the confident mockery of a victory already secured by the Germans, yet beneath the surface, history was quietly shifting its course. The tide of war was turning, yet again, and this time, the situation for the American troops defending Bastogne was dire. Encircled by powerful German armored units, the U.S. forces found themselves trapped within a tightening noose. The only conceivable hope of salvation lay in a singular, almost unimaginable course of action: an honorable surrender, surrendering the besieged town to avoid complete annihilation of the soldiers and their positions. The German officers, exuding a sense of supreme confidence, waited patiently, fully convinced of their impending triumph. Their calculations were grim but confident. 18,000 Americans were surrounded by roughly 30,000 Germans, backed by hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles. No supplies could reach the beleaguered defenders. The weather conditions had grounded all Allied aircraft, cutting off vital air support. The nearest Allied relief forces were over 100 miles away, unable to intervene in time. What the Germans did not realize was that, just to the south, an extraordinary plan was unfolding. An audacious promise made by General George S. Patton that seemed almost too ambitious to believe, even to his own superiors. Patton had vowed that he would move an entire army through the brutal winter terrain faster than any military force before it, a feat that defied conventional logistics and the harsh conditions of December's relentless cold. This pledge was so daring that even General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, thought it a jest when he first heard it. Yet Patton's resolve was unwavering, and his plan was set into motion. A plan that would soon alter the very mathematics of warfare itself. The outcome would hinge not solely on numerical superiority or advanced weaponry, but on the collision of overconfidence and underestimated resolve. It would be a test of sheer audacity, driven by a general who refused to accept the notion that anything was impossible. This extraordinary transformation in the tide of war had begun precisely 6 days earlier, in the pre-dawn darkness of December the 16th, 1944. At exactly 5:30 in the morning, the serene silence of the Ardennes forest shattered as a ferocious barrage erupted, unleashing a violence unseen on the Western Front since the early days of 1940, or perhaps even earlier. The air was filled with the deafening roar of 1,856 German artillery pieces, all firing in unison along an 80-mile stretch of front line. Shells screamed through the icy atmosphere, hurtling towards unsuspecting American positions below. Among the American soldiers caught in this inferno was Private First Class Robert Leakey of the 99th Infantry Division, who later recounted in his diary the chaos and devastation wrought that day. He wrote that the earth beneath them trembled violently, trees were torn apart and exploded into splinters, and the very air seemed to scream in agony. Despite assurances that the Germans had been defeated and rendered incapable of such a massive assault, the reality was starkly different. The offensive was underway. It was Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last desperate attempt to turn the tide of the war in his favor. In absolute secrecy, the German Wehrmacht had assembled an enormous force of 410,000 troops, supported by 1,400 tanks, assault guns, and an overwhelming array of 2,600 artillery pieces. This colossal force had been moved through the dense, labyrinthine forests of the Eifel region under the cover of night, maintaining radio silence and using horses to transport supplies to avoid detection by Allied air reconnaissance. The mood was somber and tense. General Major Heinz Kokott, commanding the 66th Volksgrenadier Division, recorded the moment before the attack. His soldiers stood motionless in the cold darkness, their breath forming icy clouds as they prepared for what was to come. They understood the stakes clearly. This was not just another offensive, but potentially the final chance for the Germans to reverse their fortunes in the war's waning months. Their objective was the weakest point in the Allied line, a segment stretched thin across difficult terrain, manned by many American divisions who were still relatively inexperienced in combat. The battle during the intense and chaotic battles of this period, the German forces managed to achieve a remarkable feat, delivering a complete surprise attack on the defending American units. Their tactical maneuver was executed with such precision and speed that within a matter of hours, entire American battalions found themselves overwhelmed, either overrun by the swift German advance or forced into a disorganized retreat. The element of surprise was the Germans' most critical advantage, and it played a decisive role in their initial success. However, this aggressive push was not without its strict requirements. The German command knew that their entire operation hinged on maintaining an exceptionally rapid pace. Time was of the essence. Their goal was to seize a crucial strategic point, the road junction at Bastogne, within a narrow window of just 48 hours. This junction was a vital crossroads where 7 major roads converged, making it a strategic nexus for movement and supply routes. Capturing Bastogne was essential because the German tanks and mechanized units needed to use these roads to advance further toward their ultimate objective, the port of Antwerp, located roughly 125 miles distant. If Bastogne remained in enemy hands, the entire offensive effort could grind to a halt, jeopardizing the Germans' broader strategic plans. Without control of this critical junction, their advance toward the coast and the capture of the port would be severely compromised. Leading the German assault on Bastogne was General de Ponce Tropen Hinrich Freiherr von Ludwitz, who commanded the formidable 47th Panzer Corps. His forces were a force to be reckoned with, comprising some of the best-equipped and most experienced units available. Among them was the elite 2nd Panzer Division, a unit reinforced with 88 tanks and assault guns, boasting both armor and firepower capable of breaking through most defenses. Alongside them was the veteran Panzer Lehr Division, with 57 tanks, seasoned from previous campaigns, and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, which brought a formidable 27,000 infantry soldiers to the fight. This combination of armored strength and infantry manpower underlined the seriousness with which the Germans approached this critical operation. From the opposite side of the same strategic objective came the American response, embodied by the 101st Airborne Division, famously known as the Screaming Eagles. These airborne troops had been resting in Reims, France, after enduring a grueling 72 days of combat in Holland. Their rest was abruptly interrupted by the urgent call to action, leaving no time for the usual preparations. No winter clothing had been issued, and there was simply no chance to organize additional supplies or equipment. The order was direct: grab your weapons, board the trucks, and prepare to move immediately. On the evening of December the 17th at 900 hours, the first trucks of the 101st Airborne Division began their journey under the cover of darkness, heading toward Bastogne. The temperature had plummeted to 14 degrees Fahrenheit, adding to the already grueling conditions faced by the soldiers. Private Donald Burgett, a member of the 61st Parachute Infantry Regiment, vividly remembered the harrowing journey. As they moved, Burgett recalled passing endless columns of American troops heading in the opposite direction, retreating in the face of the sudden German assault. Many of these soldiers were in a dire state. Some had no weapons, others lacked helmets, and all seemed overwhelmed by fear and confusion. The retreating soldiers shouted at the advancing column, desperately pleading for the Americans to turn back, warning that they would be killed if they continued forward. One soldier, eyes wide with terror, grabbed Burgett's arm and warned him of the overwhelming enemy presence, describing the German forces as comprising tigers, panthers, and everything. Burgett, however, pushed him away, resolute in their mission. There was no turning back. The convoy stretched for miles, consisting of approximately 380 trucks carrying the division's soldiers and equipment through the cold night. The soldiers inside these trucks had little idea of what awaited them ahead. Maps were scarce, and intelligence reports were contradictory, providing only scattered pieces of information. All they knew for certain was the urgent need to reach Bastogne before the Germans could consolidate their hold on the crossroads. The strength of the 101st Airborne Division at this critical moment was formidable. The division's effective strength totaled around 85 officers and 11,035 enlisted men, bringing their total personnel count to approximately 11,840 soldiers. Their organization included 4 infantry regiments, the 501st, 502nd, and 506th Parachute Infantry Regiments, along with the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, supported by 4 artillery battalions and various logistical and support units. By the early hours of December 18th, the leading elements of the 501 PIR managed to reach Bastogne, arriving at approximately 11:30 at night. Their swift advance allowed them to beat the main German force by only a few hours, a narrow margin that underscored. The defenders knew that in order to stand any chance of repelling the relentless German assault, they would have to allow the enemy to approach dangerously close, so close in fact, that they could strike from the side with devastating effect. This was a strategy born out of necessity, as the brutal battle for Nouville stretched on relentlessly throughout the entire day. A small but courageous unit, Team Diaries, consisting of just 15 Sherman tanks, found itself confronting an entire division, the formidable 2nd Panzer Division. Despite the overwhelmed odds, these tanks managed to hold their ground for an astonishing 48 hours, a feat that demonstrated extraordinary resilience and tactical discipline. During this intense period of fighting, they destroyed a total of 31 German tanks, inflicting significant damage on the enemy's armored forces, before ultimately they received orders to withdraw. Major Diaries, leading the tank unit, was severely wounded when a German shell struck his command post, a reminder of the brutal cost of such fierce combat. Yet his sacrifice had served a vital purpose, buying precious time for the remaining defenders and allowing reinforcements or strategic repositioning to take place. It was a stand that underscored the desperate and heroic nature of their resistance. On December 20th, a new chapter in the battle unfolded as Brigadier General Anthony Clement McAuliffe arrived at Bastogne to assume temporary command of the storied 101st Airborne Division, while their commanding officer, General Maxwell Taylor, was away in Washington. McAuliffe, an artillery officer by training, was renowned across the ranks for his calm, composed demeanor, an invaluable trait amid the chaos of war. He was known for remaining unshaken under pressure, a quality that would prove crucial in the days ahead as the situation around Bastogne grew increasingly dire. Within the command headquarters, a detailed map painted a grim and sobering picture of the encroaching threat. German forces were advancing from three different directions, tightening the noose around the besieged town. From the south and east, the 26th Volk Grenadier Division was infiltrating stealthily. The Panzer itself was exerting pressure from the east, while units of the 2nd Panzer Division threatened from the north. By midday on that December 20th, the last remaining road into Bastogne, the vital highway leading to Neufchâteau, had been cut off, severing the town's only direct link to the outside world. Amid this chaos, Captain Richard Winters of Easy Company, part of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, organized his men into foxholes along the perimeter of Bastogne's defenses. As night fell, they could hear the ominous sounds of German tanks moving in the darkness beyond their lines, a chilling reminder of the enemy's relentless approach. The soldiers were hurriedly digging deeper foxholes, using their helmets and even their bare hands when their entrenching tools broke in the frozen, unforgiving ground. The temperature hovered near 0 degrees Fahrenheit, a bitter cold that was taking a toll on all. Many soldiers' feet began turning black from frostbite, a cruel consequence of the freezing conditions that added yet another layer of peril to their already desperate situation. Inside Bastogne, the civilian population of approximately 3,000 men, women, and children huddled anxiously in cellars and basements, seeking shelter from the relentless German artillery bombardments that systematically destroyed the town's infrastructure. Amidst the chaos and destruction, Renée Lamimere, a dedicated 30-year-old Belgian nurse, worked tirelessly at the aid station located on Rue Neufchâteau. She tended to the wounded from both sides, American soldiers fighting to defend the town, and German soldiers wounded in the fierce clashes. Her selfless efforts embodied the spirit of resilience that characterized the defenders' attitude. Tragically, she would not survive the siege, her unwavering dedication ending in her death amid the chaos she had tried so hard to alleviate. The defenders of Bastogne, despite their limited numbers, had managed to assemble a formidable force. The total strength of the town's defense was approximately 18,000 men, comprising the 101st Airborne Division, which alone numbered about 11,840 personnel. Additional units included Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, commanded by Colonel William Roberts, with around 40 operational tanks and a force of roughly 2,800 soldiers. There was also the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcat tanks, along with the All-African American 969th Artillery Battalion and various other artillery and support units, each playing a vital role in the defensive effort. As dawn broke on December 21st, visibility had diminished to less than 100 yards due to a thick fog that mingled with falling snow, creating a white, oppressive shroud over the battlefield. Movement was almost impossible under these conditions. According to the official meteorological report from the U.S. Army, the weather conditions were described as extremely unfavorable for any military operations. The cold fog and snow created. The conditions on the Eastern Front were growing increasingly dire as the relentless winter weather took its toll on both soldiers and supplies. On the treacherous, icy roads, men struggled to move forward, their progress impeded by frozen terrain and slick surfaces that made every step perilous. Tragically, many wounded soldiers succumbed to the brutal cold before aid could even reach them, their bodies succumbing to the unforgiving elements. Inside Bastogne's formidable defensive perimeter, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. The defenders faced a severe shortage of ammunition, with supplies dwindling dangerously close to exhaustion. Artillery units were forced to ration their firepower carefully, limiting each gun to only 10 rounds per day, a measure that underscored the desperate scarcity of ammunition in the face of ongoing combat. Medical supplies, already strained, had been nearly depleted after the loss of the medical company on December 19th, leaving the wounded without adequate treatment. Morphine, a critical painkiller, had to be reserved for only the most severe injuries, as there simply wasn't enough to go around. Food supplies had dwindled to the point where only a single meal a day was possible for the soldiers, leaving them weak and emaciated. Private First Class James Sims, serving with the 101st Regiment, later recounted in harrowing detail how the soldiers were reduced to eating snow for water. He described the brutal frostbite that had claimed his comrades' toes, which were frozen to his boots. When the medic finally had to amputate the frozen toes, the soldier did not even cry. His pain had become numbness, his suffering so profound that he was beyond feeling anything at all. Many miles to the south, approximately 130 miles from Bastogne, a vastly different scene was unfolding at Verdun on December 19th. Inside a cold and damp French military barracks, the environment was bleak and uninviting, warmed only by a single, small pot-bellied stove that struggled to provide enough heat. It was here that Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower convened an emergency conference among his senior commanders to discuss the critical and deteriorating situation. The room was crowded with the most senior figures of the Allied forces: Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, and Lieutenant General George S. Patton, each one a key player in the ongoing conflict. Major General Kenneth Strong, who was Eisenhower's chief of intelligence, had just completed a briefing on the startling German breakthrough, bringing unsettling news that had cast a shadow over the entire Allied command. The heavy silence that followed this briefing was almost deafening, filled with unspoken apprehension and concern. Finally, Eisenhower broke the silence with words that would come to define the American strategic response in the days ahead. His voice was steady but resolute as he addressed the gathered officers, emphasizing that the current crisis should be viewed not as a catastrophe, but as an opportunity. He stressed that the situation presented a chance for a strategic counterattack and urged his commanders to maintain a positive outlook. The present situation, he asserted, should be regarded as one of opportunity for us, rather than a disaster. His words carried a message of resilience and hope, inspiring confidence rather than despair among the assembled leaders. Lieutenant General Patton, always quick with a grin and eager for action, immediately responded with a bold and enthusiastic suggestion. "Hell, let's have the courage to push our sons all the way to Paris. Then we will really have them trapped and cut off." His proposal was met with a mixture of agreement and surprise, but Eisenhower recognized the importance of decisive action. Turning to George, Eisenhower asked with a tone of strategic seriousness, "I need you to attack north. How quickly can you disengage from your current offensive and pivot your forces toward Bastogne?" Patton's response was astonishing and demonstrated his confidence and readiness. Without hesitation, he declared, "I can attack with 3 divisions within 48 hours." The statement caused a wave of disbelief among the officers present, as such a rapid redeployment in winter conditions across icy roads was considered nearly impossible. Even Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tadar couldn't suppress a laugh. He scoffed at the notion that an entire corps could be moved 90 degrees across 100 meters of frozen terrain in just 2 days. The room erupted with disbelief and skepticism, with some officers shaking their heads at what they perceived as an unrealistic goal. Eisenhower's face flushed with a mixture of concern and frustration. "Don't be naive, George," he warned. "If you attempt to move that early, you will not have all 3 divisions ready, and your forces will come in piecemeal, risking destruction." However, Patton was not making empty boasts. For the past 3 days, his meticulous operations officer, Colonel Oscar Coe, had been warning him about the emerging German buildup in the Ardennes. Patton had already prepared multiple operational plans tailored for exactly this kind of scenario. He had pre-positioned fuel dumps, ammunition supplies, and medical units along Tonya. General Dwight D. Eisenhower meticulously examined the map spread out before him, noting the sheer scale of the operation that lay ahead. The distances involved were absolutely staggering, stretching the imagination and testing the limits of planning and logistics. To make matters even more challenging, the weather conditions were utterly atrocious. The skies were cloaked in persistent, gloomy clouds, and the terrain was transformed into a treacherous expanse of icy, mirror-like surfaces. The roads, which were supposed to serve as arteries of movement, had become slick and dangerous sheets of ice, complicating every step of the military's intricate maneuvering. Despite these formidable obstacles, the strategic imperative was clear. The city of Bastogne had to be relieved at all costs. The urgency of the mission pressed heavily on all involved, demanding swift and decisive action. When could the operation commence? The answer was set for the early hours of December 22nd, in the morning, immediately signaling the start of a complex and daring offensive. The command was straightforward and resolute. Do it. As General Patton exited the crucial planning meeting, he immediately reached out to his command headquarters. Using a prearranged code word, play ball, he initiated the mobilization process. That simple phrase triggered a cascade of swift and coordinated military movements, setting into motion one of the most extraordinary operational maneuvers in the entire history of warfare. Within a matter of hours, an enormous force would begin its relentless advance. 133,000 vehicles started their northward journey, an impressive sight under any circumstances, let alone amidst the chaos of a winter battlefield. The entire Third Army, comprising approximately 250,000 men, had to be rapidly reoriented and repositioned to meet the new strategic objectives. The logistical challenges were monumental. Supply dumps, carefully established in preparation for an offensive aimed at invading Germany, now had to be swiftly relocated to new positions. This was no small task. It involved moving vast quantities of supplies and equipment across difficult terrain and unpredictable weather. Additionally, 20,000 miles of telephone wire, a vital communication network, had to be rerung to ensure uninterrupted command and control. Artillery positions, which had been meticulously calculated and positioned to fire in one direction, needed to be reassessed and recalibrated for the new offensive route. An intricate process that required precision and haste, with no margin for error. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, received his orders at 700 hours on December 19th. His unit was tasked with a grueling march, covering 150 miles in just 19 hours, through a ferocious blizzard that battered the landscape and obscured visibility. Abrams later recalled the ordeal vividly. "We drove with blackout lights through the night," he said, describing how the convoy pressed on despite the treacherous conditions. Tank commanders, braced in their turrets and shivering from the cold, stood watch, guiding their drivers who struggled to see the road ahead. Many men, exhausted and cold, fell asleep standing up, only to be shaken awake by their comrades. The logistics of this movement were staggering in scale and complexity. Each Sherman tank consumed approximately 175 gallons of fuel for the entire journey. The division alone required 50,000 gallons just to reach the initial staging area. Fuel trucks rolled continuously, many skidding off icy roads into ditches, adding to the chaos. When trucks inevitably broke down under the strain, fuel had to be transferred manually, an arduous task involving 5-gallon jerry cans carried and poured by hand. Master Sergeant Frank Carousel from the 4th Armored Maintenance Company worked tirelessly for 72 hours straight, performing repairs and ensuring the tanks and vehicles remained operational. The operations staff faced the daunting task of changing track blocks on tanks that were still moving into their designated positions, a process that required incredible precision and courage. Men's hands often froze to the cold metal, and there were instances where their skin was torn when they pulled away from the frozen surfaces. Yet nobody stopped working. Everyone understood the stakes. These paratroopers and armored units in Bastogne were counting on their success, and there was no room for hesitation or failure. Meanwhile, in Bastogne, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. The encirclement had tightened significantly, reducing the Allied perimeter to less than 16 miles. German artillery, expertly aimed and coordinated, was zeroing in on every stronghold, inflicting devastating damage. The aid stations, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of wounded soldiers, functioned under enormous pressure, struggling to provide care amid the chaos. On the morning of December 22nd at 11:30 in the morning, a tense moment unfolded when 4 German officers approached the American lines under a white flag, signaling a potential surrender or a request for negotiations. They were met by soldiers from F Company, the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. The German delegation consisted of Major Wagner from the 47th Panzer Corps, Lieutenant Helmuth Henn. The entire German communication was relayed aloud, emphasizing the dire and seemingly hopeless predicament faced by the American forces. The message portrayed an urgent warning that German artillery units were fully prepared to decimate the advancing American troops, suggesting that only surrender could possibly spare them from complete annihilation. This stark portrayal of their predicament underscored the desperation of the situation and the formidable power of the German military's artillery barrage. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, Colonel Moore turned to his officers and inquired about the appropriate course of action or the typical response to such a formidable ultimatum. McAuliffe, the American commander, was honestly puzzled and admitted that he had no clear idea of what reply would be suitable under such circumstances. His uncertainty reflected the gravity and ambiguity of the moment, where standard protocols seemed inadequate against such a threatening declaration. Then Lieutenant Colonel Harry Card interjected with a remark that would later become legendary in military history, noting that the initial statement from the Germans was difficult to surpass in terms of bravado or defiance. He implied that the Germans' threat was almost beyond comparison in its audacity. This prompted McAuliffe to respond with a laugh, jokingly asking whether their message was just nuts, a colloquial way of saying crazy or insane. The room broke into spontaneous agreement, recognizing the boldness of their stance. Seizing this moment of camaraderie and resolve, McAuliffe took pen and paper and composed a brief yet defiant reply that would resonate through history. The single word he chose, nuts, became an iconic symbol of American resilience and refusal to surrender. It conveyed a blunt, unwavering rejection of the German ultimatum, symbolizing the Americans' steadfast refusal to capitulate regardless of the overwhelming odds. When Colonel Joseph Harper delivered this terse, bold response to the German officers who were waiting nearby, confusion quickly ensued among the Germans. They couldn't comprehend the meaning of nuts, and so Harper couldn't resist clarifying its significance, saying simply that it meant, go to hell. The bluntness of this reply encapsulated the American spirit of defiance. Harper continued with a fierce declaration, warning that if the Germans dared to attack again, they would face annihilation, specifically threatening to kill every single German soldier attempting to breach their defenses into Bastogne. This aggressive stance drew a stiffening response from Major Wagner, who emphasized that the Germans would also kill many Americans in the process, reminding everyone that this was, after all, a brutal war. Harper, however, dismissed Wagner's warning with a quick retort, telling him to move along and wishing him good luck, underscoring the American resolve not to back down. Later, General Hasso von Montel of the 5th Panzer Army admitted that he was genuinely surprised that such an ultimatum was even sent to Bastogne, revealing the shock within the German command structure. He explained that a division of panzer troops had even sent a diplomatic envoy to Bastogne without his permission, and that the Germans' demand for surrender had been outright rejected, as everyone had anticipated. The German military's reaction to McAuliffe's fearless and defiant response was swift and brutal. That very evening, the Luftwaffe launched its first major bombing assault on Bastogne, unleashing chaos and destruction upon the besieged city. For those defending Bastogne in their foxholes, this attack was nothing short of a preview of hell on earth. Corporal Walter Gordon of Easy Company vividly described the terror of the bombing, the ground trembling as if struck by an earthquake, trees erupting into flames, and shrapnel whizzing through the air like furious hornets seeking victims. The defenders pressed themselves into the frozen earth, praying for safety amid the chaos. The biting cold further compounded their suffering, with temperatures plummeting to almost 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Men huddled in their foxholes along the perimeter, taking turns sleeping so as not to succumb to hypothermia, and resorted to urinating into empty ration cans to avoid leaving their protected positions. Even brief exposure to the freezing air could prove deadly, either from sniper fire or frostbite, adding a constant threat to their ordeal. Meanwhile, food supplies had become critically low, forcing the soldiers into desperate measures. The official ration provided only 1 kilogram per day, which amounted to roughly 2,800 calories, far less than the 4,000 calories needed for survival in such extreme cold conditions. Soldiers had to improvise to sustain themselves, often saving the wax-coated cardboard from ration boxes, which they would burn to produce enough heat to warm a canteen of snow into drinkable water. One resourceful technical sergeant, Donald Malarkey, devised an inventive solution to the dire food shortage. He and his comrades discovered that the hundreds of dead German horses, frozen solid in the bitter cold, could be used as a source of fresh meat. Using bayonets, they would hacking off chunks of flesh from the frozen corpses, and in the chaos of that devastating attack, dozens of wounded soldiers and dedicated medical personnel found themselves trapped beneath the rubble of what once was a bustling aid station. The blast had been so powerful that it reduced the entire structure to a tangled heap of debris. Outside, Corporal Kenneth Moore was present when the explosion struck. He vividly recalled hearing the deafening blast and instinctively rushing toward the site of destruction. When he reached the site, what had been the aid station was nothing more than a jumble of broken materials, with faint voices emanating from beneath the wreckage. Men desperately calling out for assistance, crying for their mothers in their final moments. With nothing but their bare hands, Moore and others tirelessly dug through the debris throughout the long, harrowing night, desperately pulling out bodies and trying to save those still alive. Among the fallen was Miss Lemaire, a nurse who had chosen to remain with the wounded, unable to be moved, sacrificing herself in her unwavering commitment to care for others. That single bombing claimed the lives of 30 American soldiers, a tragic loss that was compounded by the death of a Belgian nurse named Augusta Chewy, who had become a beacon of hope and resilience for the wounded. Augusta, a Congolese Belgian nurse, remarkably survived the attack and continued to tend to the injured for an additional 30 hours amidst the chaos and destruction. As Christmas Eve steadily gave way to Christmas Day, Patton's Third Army found itself battling not only the enemy, but also the harsh elements, struggling through a relentless blizzard. The offensive that had begun on December 22nd was severely behind schedule. The 4th Armored Division had only managed to advance a mere 7 miles over 3 days. Frustrated with the slow progress, General Patton, known for his unconventional thinking, summoned his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill, on December 22nd with a peculiar and urgent request. "Chaplain," Patton said, "I want you to prepare and publish a prayer for good weather. I am exhausted from seeing my soldiers have to fight in mud, floods, and freezing conditions on top of the enemy's attacks. I need divine intervention. See if you can persuade God to help us out." O'Neill, initially skeptical, responded cautiously, "Sir, it's going to take quite a strong faith, or perhaps a very thick rug, for that kind of praying to work." Patton, undeterred, shot back with determination. "I don't care if it takes a flying carpet, just get a prayer for good weather written." True to his word, the prayer was composed and printed on 250,000 cards, then distributed to every soldier within the Third Army. The prayer itself was a humble plea. "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech thee, out of thy great goodness, to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle, whether through divine intervention or meteorological coincidence." Remarkably, the very next day, December 23rd, the weather transformed dramatically. The sky cleared, revealing a crisp, crystal-clear dawn, an unprecedented event after a week filled with thick fog, persistent snow, and relentless storms. The visibility suddenly expanded to 10 miles, a stark contrast to the days of gloom and obscurity. Temperatures rose above freezing for the first time in 7 days, allowing the Allied air forces to finally take to the skies again. At exactly 9:50 a.m., the first Pathfinder aircraft appeared over Bastogne, releasing colored smoke to mark drop zones for the impending airdrops. By 11:50 a.m., the sky was filled with a formation of 241 C-47 transport planes flying in perfect synchronization. Sergeant Jack Acknew, a member of the Pathfinder team, vividly recalled that moment. "We released purple smoke to mark the drop zone, and then we heard it. A low rumble that grew into a deafening roar. The sky turned dark with aircraft, and it was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen." The paratroopers in Bastogne erupted into cheers and applause as they watched the unfolding rescue operation. Men climbed out of their foxholes, waving their helmets in the air, many with tears streaming down their faces, overwhelmed by the sight of relief after days of isolation and desperation. For 7 long days, they had been cut off and left to fend for themselves. Now the sky was filled with a fleet of help arriving from the skies. The parachutes began to blossom at 11:55 a.m., bringing with them vital supplies, ammunition, medical supplies, food, blankets, and most critically, artillery shells. Out of 1,446 bundles dropped, an astonishing 95% were successfully recovered, ensuring that the soldiers had what they needed to continue fighting and surviving in the face of adversity. The logistical section of the G4 Intelligence Division meticulously coordinated the critical task of recovering supplies and equipment during the fierce battle. Soldiers sprinted through enemy artillery fire, desperately trying to reach and secure vital bundles of supplies. I vividly recall witnessing a young private, struck by shrapnel, stumble back from the chaos. Despite the blood streaming down his face, he summoned his strength, rose to his feet, and, with unwavering determination, dragged a bundle of supplies to a safer cover. His bravery exemplified the relentless spirit of those fighting on the front lines. Meanwhile, the German forces were not merely passive observers. They actively engaged in fierce countermeasures. Anti-aircraft guns strategically positioned around Bastogne opened a relentless barrage of fire, aimed at defending the city and the Allied aircraft overhead. The American C-47 transport planes faced a dire threat, as they had to fly straight and level under 1,000 feet, a perilous maneuver that made them easy targets. These planes were sitting ducks in the sky, vulnerable to enemy fire. By the 26th of December, the airlift effort had delivered an astonishing total of over 1,020 tons of supplies via parachute drops, along with an additional approximately 92 tons delivered by glider. The most substantial airlift occurred on the same day, when a fleet of approximately 289 aircraft participated in the crucial Boston Run, a massive logistical feat. As dawn broke on Christmas morning at 2:45 a.m., German artillery launched their heaviest barrage yet upon Bastogne. For 2 harrowing hours, shells rained down relentlessly on the American positions, shaking the ground and causing chaos amidst the defensive lines. The assault intensified at 5:30 a.m., when 18 Panzer Mark V tanks, belonging to the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, supported by infantry clad in white camouflage, launched an aggressive attack on the western perimeter of Bastogne. Leading this assault was Lieutenant Colonel Wolfgang Mahler. His orders from General Kokut were unequivocal. Bastogne must fall today. It was the Führer's Christmas wish, and the German command was determined to make it a reality. The German tanks advanced fiercely, breaking through the first line of foxholes held by Company A of the 327th Glider Infantry. Private First Class Kenneth Hendris found himself in the second defensive line, witnessing the ground tremble from the relentless engine noises of the invading vehicles. In the early morning light, these tanks resembled monstrous beasts, their armor glinting ominously. American soldiers attempted to halt their progress with bazooka rounds, but many bounced harmlessly off the formidable armor. However, the Americans had anticipated this and had positioned their tank destroyers, a battalion of M18 Hellcats, to strike from hidden locations within the rubble of destroyed buildings. As the German tanks rolled past, these hidden anti-tank guns opened fire from the flanks, catching the Germans off guard. Sergeant Bill Harper commanded one of these Hellcats. His squad let the enemy tanks pass, then focused their fire on the tank's weaker rear armor, striking from the sides where it was thinnest. His gunner, Corporal Johnson, displayed exceptional marksmanship, firing 5 shots that resulted in 3 tanks destroyed in a matter of moments. By 10 o'clock in the morning, all 18 German tanks had been reduced to burning wrecks, with nearly 400 German soldiers lying dead in the snow, victims of both fierce combat and effective American tactics. One captured German officer, during interrogation, admitted to his captors with a mixture of resignation and respect. "Your defense was magnificent. We knew after this morning that we could not take Bastogne." That same day, General McAuliffe addressed the troops with a Christmas message, recounting the German refusal to surrender and reaffirming the resolve of the American forces. He emphasized how they had successfully repelled attacks from all directions, north, east, south, and west, stating, "We have stopped cold everything that has been thrown at us from all sides." His words were a testament to their resilience and unwavering spirit amidst ongoing adversity. Later that afternoon at approximately 4 p.m., Lieutenant Charles Bogus, commanding the Sherman tank named Cobra King of the 37th Tank Battalion, peered through his periscope toward the Belgian village of Assin-en-Noir, which lay just about 4 miles from Bastogne. For nearly 4 days, the 4th Armored Division had been engaged in intense combat, pushing tirelessly through German defensive positions, advancing inch by bloody inch across the battered landscape. The final phase of their assault was set to begin. At precisely 2:20 p.m., Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams ordered his battalion forward, simultaneously calling for heavy artillery support. His command was clear and urgent. "I want every gun you've got firing now." Within moments, a barrage of approximately 2,340 artillery rounds thundered down upon the German positions surrounding Assenoir. Bogus vividly remembered the scene. "Move out," we commanded, our voices ringing out as we charged forward at maximum speed, unleashing a relentless barrage of gunfire. Private James Hendress, serving as the bow gunner aboard Cobra King, vividly recounted that intense moment of the breakthrough. Our forces surged through the town with such ferocity and speed that it seemed as if a hot knife had cut through butter, leaving destruction in our wake. The Germans, caught off guard, responded with a hail of gunfire, shooting from windows, doorways, and every conceivable position. Our 75mm main gun swung rapidly from left to right, firing at point-blank range into the facades of buildings, determined to neutralize any resistance. At 4:50 in the afternoon, Cobra King crested a small rise on the terrain, revealing a surprising sight ahead. Bogus, the commander, saw American soldiers assembled in front of us, engineers from the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion, stationed at what was the outer perimeter of Bastonia's defenses. Their voices rang out, loud and clear. "Come on in! You're the first tanks we've seen in 10 days." These words carried a mixture of relief and astonishment. Bogus quickly relayed the situation via radio to General Abrams, confirming that contact with friendly forces had been established. The long, arduous siege was finally broken, yet the victory had come at a heavy cost. The toll on our forces was tragic and undeniable. The 37th Tank Battalion had suffered the loss of 5 soldiers killed, 22 wounded, and 5 missing persons. Meanwhile, the 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion endured 30 casualties, killed in action, and 180 wounded. Despite these staggering losses, the strategic corridor, spanning only about 400 yards in width, was now open, an unimpeded path through Bastonia's defenses. News of this breakthrough spread rapidly through the city, igniting a wave of excitement and hope among the defenders and the liberated populace alike. Men who had been conserving every precious round of ammunition suddenly erupted in celebration, firing entire clips into the air in jubilation. Even wounded soldiers confined to aid stations and suffering immense pain cheered as they heard the news. Amidst this emotional upheaval, General McAuliffe maintained his usual composed demeanor and simply remarked, "We're glad to see you, boys." Yet for the Germans, the psychological blow was immense and demoralizing. Major General Kokot recorded in his diary that the relief of Bastogne was not only a tactical disaster, but also a severe moral defeat. He noted that their soldiers no longer believed in their ability to win, having witnessed the unwavering American determination, which had utterly shattered their resolve. Oberstleutnant Kaufmann, a seasoned officer from the Panzer Division, was even more blunt in his assessment. He stated that they had thrown everything they had at Bastogne, some of their best troops, their last reserves of tanks, and their dwindling stocks of ammunition. Yet despite their efforts, the defenders refused to surrender and instead laughed at their demands. The Germans' single-word reply, "nuts," resounded with bitter sarcasm and did more to break morale than a series of devastating bombings. Initially, the defenders of Bastogne numbered around 18,000 men. However, by December 26th, the casualties sustained by the 101st Airborne Division from December 19th to January 6th would total 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing. The Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division alone suffered roughly 500 casualties, reflecting the fierce fighting. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, despite the intense enemy resistance, destroyed 108 German armored vehicles while losing only 17 Hellcat tanks in return. German losses around Bastogne were catastrophic, amounting to over 60% casualties in some units. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division, in particular, suffered severe losses, exceeding 60% of their personnel. The Panzer Lehr Division lost 42 tanks, a crippling blow. Meanwhile, the 2nd Panzer Division, which had bypassed Bastogne to advance toward the Moose River, found itself out of fuel just 4 miles from the riverbank. It was subsequently destroyed by the United States 2nd Armored Division, which capitalized on their exhausted state. The 27th of December brought clearer weather, ushering in the full might of Allied air power. Over the course of the previous 5 days, from the 23rd through the 27th, Allied aircraft had flown more than 34,000 sorties, striking with relentless precision. The Luftwaffe, which had begun the offensive with approximately 2,000 aircraft, was decimated within a week and reduced to fewer than 300 planes still operational. An overwhelming defeat for the German Air Force. Flight Lieutenant Pierre Klustermann of the Royal Air Force flew a Tempest fighter bomber over the battlefield, participating in the aerial assault that would further diminish the enemy's ability to resist. The battlefield was a scene of relentless destruction, a domain where the tactics of tank plinking reigned supreme, a term coined to describe the precise and methodical targeting of enemy armored vehicles. During these operations, the Germans found themselves severely disadvantaged, lacking any significant air support to defend their positions. Our units would stealthily descend from altitudes of 8,000 feet, executing daring dives, and at a carefully calculated point, release their rocket payloads at approximately 2,000 feet above the ground. After the attack, we would swiftly ascend back into the skies, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Below us, German military vehicles and convoys would be engulfed in flames, their wreckage stretching for many miles across the terrain, a testament to the effectiveness of our strikes. Among the many intense raids, the most destructive took place on December 26th, when a formidable force of 294 Royal Air Force Lancaster bombers launched a massive assault upon German positions encircling St. V. This aerial bombardment unleashed an astonishing 1,140 tons of high-explosive bombs, obliterating everything within a radius of 3 kilometers, rendering roads impassable and decimating the enemy's logistical network. The intensity of this attack was such that it transformed the landscape into a charred, desolate wasteland, what could be described as a moonscape, where the earth itself seemed to erupt in a final, violent burst of destruction. Buildings disintegrated into rubble, and entire groups of men simply vanished amidst the chaos, vaporized by the relentless onslaught. In the aftermath of this devastating raid, I emerged from my shelter to survey the extent of the destruction. The panoramic view revealed a landscape utterly transformed by fire and destruction. It was a stark reminder of the power of air power when wielded with precision and coordination. In the wake of this operation, General McAuliffe, a prominent figure in the defense, made a point of publicly acknowledging the critical contribution of the 19th Tactical Air Command. He expressed sincere gratitude, stating that without their superb cooperation, the defenders' holdout would have been impossible, highlighting the crucial role played by air support in turning the tide of the siege. Throughout this arduous siege, a remarkable transformation was quietly taking place within the ranks of the German forces, a psychological shift that would only be fully understood by Allied intelligence in the years following the war. Initially, the German soldiers had entered the conflict with a mixture of propaganda and assumptions, believing that they faced a weak and spoiled enemy who would retreat at the first sign of serious combat. This misconception was, however, shattered at Bastogne, where reality proved far more formidable. On December 24th, Gerrit Wilhelm Hoffmann, a soldier of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, wrote a heartfelt letter to his wife. This letter, later recovered from his body, revealed the true nature of the American soldiers. The Americans are not what we were told. They fight like devils. Hoffmann recounted witnessing an extraordinary display of American resolve when a single machine gun crew managed to hold off an entire German company for 3 hours, an act of remarkable bravery and resilience. The transformation in the German psyche was further reinforced by the capture of Major Jan Krag of the Panzer Lehr Division on December 27. His subsequent interrogation produced a statement that was both insightful and humbling for the Germans. Krag acknowledged that the Germans had won battles not solely due to superior numbers or weaponry, but because of the indomitable spirit, the fighting spirit of the American soldiers. He admitted that at Bastogne, the Germans had learned that American troops were genuine warriors, capable of fierce resistance and remarkable resilience even under the most challenging circumstances. While the defense of Bastogne garnered widespread headlines and admiration, the broader strategic significance of General Patton's relief operation represented an even more extraordinary development, a true revolution in operational warfare. The scale of the logistical achievement was staggering. Within just 72 hours, Patton's Third Army had maneuvered an astonishing 250,000 men across more than 100 miles of icy, treacherous roads, all without a single conspicuous traffic jam. They had successfully repositioned 133,000 vehicles and laid 20,000 meters of telephone wire, establishing a complex communications network under combat conditions. Furthermore, they set up 70 new ammunition supply points, created 40 fuel dumps holding 500,000 gallons of gasoline, and erected 20 field hospitals to treat the wounded. The rapid delivery of 4,000 tons of ammunition and the distribution of 62,000 maps highlighted the meticulous planning and execution behind this maneuver, something that seemed almost impossible given the scale and conditions. Colonel Oscar Coe, who served as Patton's G2 intelligence officer, later reflected on the magnitude of what had been achieved, emphasizing that the rapid deployment in such a short time frame was beyond normal expectations. He noted that it should have taken at least 6 days simply to plan such a movement, yet it was accomplished in merely 3 days thanks to relentless preparation and foresight. During a grueling 10-day period, the battlefield saw a staggering total of 167 operations performed, many of which were carried out under extremely challenging conditions, often without the benefit of proper anesthesia. In the chaos of war, medical teams had to improvise, sometimes operating by the flickering glow of candles when the generators failed amidst the bombardments. When morphine supplies ran dry, resourceful medics resorted to using cognac, brought from Belgian homes, to help manage pain and keep wounded soldiers conscious. Among these dedicated individuals was Technical Sergeant Eugene Rowe of Easy Company, who personally attended to over 200 injured men during the relentless siege. His bravery was evident as he often crawled through artillery fire and shrapnel to reach the casualties, never carrying a weapon himself, only his medical supplies, embodying the true spirit of a medic committed to saving lives regardless of the peril around him. The steadfast defense of Bastogne, coupled with General Patton's swift and strategic relief operation, had repercussions that stretched far beyond mere tactical victory on the battlefield. The German High Command's grand offensive aimed at dividing the Allied forces and reclaiming the vital port city of Antwerp, but this plan was halted in its tracks. The fierce resistance and timely reinforcement of Bastogne signified a turning point. Hitler's grand offensive was effectively stopped cold. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who was the supreme German commander in the Western Front, later reflected during his post-war interrogation that Bastogne had become the graveyard of the Ardennes offensive. He explained that the Germans had desperately needed the vital road junction by December 18, but after a week of fierce fighting and the arrival of reinforcements for the Allies, it became clear that the offensive had failed. The Germans had committed their entire strategic reserve, 25 divisions, into this offensive, unleashing 6 weeks of relentless combat that resulted in devastating losses. These losses included between 81,000 and 98,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing, along with over 600 tanks and assault guns and 1,000 aircraft. Such losses were catastrophic for Germany, losses that they could never fully replenish. The Allies also suffered heavily, with approximately 75,000 casualties, including 21,000 killed. Yet unlike Germany, America's industrial and military capacity allowed it to replace its men and materials swiftly. By the beginning of January in 1945, new divisions were arriving from the United States at a rate of 1 every week. More critically, the intense fighting and resource expenditure had drained Germany of its last reserves. When the Soviet Red Army launched its winter offensive on January 12, 1945, Germany found itself without the strategic reserves necessary to counterattack in the east. As a result, the path to Berlin lay open, and the final Soviet push toward the German capital was imminent. The Battle of Bastogne thus stands as a symbol of resilience and strategic importance. It became a legendary chapter in military history. The defiant reply of Major McAuliffe, who proclaimed, "Nuts!" in response to the Germans' demand for surrender, entered American military folklore as an enduring symbol of stubborn resistance. Moreover, General Patton's daring relief march to Bastogne became a classic case study, studied by military academies across the globe as an exemplar of bold strategic maneuvering. Decades later, in December of 1984, veterans from both sides gathered once more at Bastogne to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the battle. Former enemies met as friends, an emblem of reconciliation and shared sacrifice. The then 91-year-old General McAuliffe delivered the keynote speech, emphasizing that their fight had been motivated not by conquest, but by the pursuit of freedom. He explained that their actions were driven by duty, not hatred, and expressed hope that the destruction wrought by war was also a catalyst for rebuilding and renewal. Among the returning veterans was Hans Detmer, a former member of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, who had fought as a German soldier, but now spoke of his changed perspective. "I came here as a conqueror in 1944. I return as a friend. The Americans we fought showed us what democracy truly means. Not weakness, but strength." Today, a monument known as the Martyrs Memorial stands atop a hill overlooking Bastogne, serving as a solemn tribute to those who fought and died in the Battle of the Bulge. This star-shaped memorial bears the inscription honoring the 76,890 American soldiers who lost their lives during this fierce engagement. Every year on December the 16th at precisely 5:30 a.m., the exact moment when the German offensive was launched, bells toll throughout Bastogne, marking the historic beginning of that decisive battle. In the town square, a Sherman tank from the 11th Armored Division stands as a tangible reminder of victory. Children climb over its armor, playing where once troop movements and fierce fighting took place. This very tank, known as the Barracuda, symbolizes the liberation of Bastogne and the resilience of those who, in the days leading up to his passing, the town's brewery paid tribute to a man whose life had become intertwined with the history of Bastogne. Upon his final visit in the year 2019, at the impressive age of 96, he lifted a glass in a silent toast. His words echoed through the room, a solemn yet proud declaration. To the boys who didn't come home, to the people who never forgot, and to the enduring spirit of freedom. His speech encapsulated the profound gratitude and reverence for those who had fought and fallen, and for the ideals they defended. The ultimate figures concerning the Bastogne operation remain staggering, illustrating both the scale of the conflict and the extraordinary efforts undertaken. The initial American troop deployment in Bastogne consisted of roughly 18,000 soldiers, a formidable force that included nearly 12,000 from the renowned 101st Airborne Division. This airborne division became legendary for its resilience and tactical prowess during the siege. Among the combat units involved was Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, which contributed around 40 operational tanks to the effort, each one a symbol of relentless determination on the battlefield. The total number of American casualties sustained during the Bastogne campaign was approximately 4,500, a somber reminder of the fierce fighting endured. On the opposing side, German forces committed a significant number of troops, initially estimated between 25,000 and 30,000 soldiers. As their campaign intensified, their numbers swelled to roughly 55,000, reflecting the escalating intensity of the conflict. The German casualties inflicted around Bastogne were estimated at over 15,000, and the number of tanks lost exceeded 100, highlighting the fierce armored clashes that took place. In response to the dire situation, General George S. Patton's relief force, a formidable force of 250,000 men, was swiftly mobilized and shifted northward in a daring maneuver. An incredible logistical effort saw over 133,000 vehicles move through winter's brutal grip, covering more than 100 miles in icy conditions to reach the besieged town in just 5 days. A stunning feat of military logistics and coordination. The supply operations conducted amidst these harrowing conditions were nothing short of extraordinary. Airborne supply efforts saw approximately 1,200 tons of provisions delivered directly to the front lines. This was achieved through a remarkable number of air sorties, 961 C-47 aircraft missions, of which over 241 flights occurred on December 23rd alone. The success rate of these drops was about 95%, demonstrating the skill and precision of the airborne logistics teams. Weather conditions during this intense period were equally challenging. For a consecutive 168 hours, temperatures remained below freezing, with the lowest temperature recorded around 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility was severely limited, falling below 100 yards from December 19th through 22nd, making flying and ground operations all the more perilous. Thankfully, by December 23rd, the weather cleared, allowing the final push to commence. International recognition of the Bastogne victory came from some of the most influential leaders of the time. Winston Churchill, addressing the British Parliament in January of 1945, declared that this campaign was undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, predicting that it would be remembered as an illustrious and historic American triumph. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the British commander, praised the American forces, stating, "The soldiers defending Bastogne wrote one of the finest chapters in military history. Their unwavering stance will be remembered as long as men honor courage itself." Oh, perhaps the most poignant tribute, however, came from a former German general, Heinrich von Luttwitz, who had commanded the 47th Panzer Corps that had encircled Bastogne. During a visit to the memorial in 1954, he saluted the courageous defenders and said, "They were magnificent enemies who became better friends. They fought not for conquest but for principles. That is why they deserve to win." The German forces, who once mocked the Americans trapped within Bastogne, learned a profound and humbling lesson during those icy December days of 1944. They realized that a free people fighting for each other's freedom are far stronger than any army fighting solely for territorial conquest. They came to understand that perseverance and resolve can outweigh sheer numbers. Most importantly, they learned that when democracy is pushed to its limits, it pushes back with a force that tyranny can never replicate. The liberation of Bastogne stands as a testament to the unyielding power of freedom, affirming that when its very existence is at stake, it will always rally its champions. During that cold and brutal December, the fighters who became the heroes of Bastogne wore the emblem of the Screaming Eagle of the 101st Airborne Division and the insignia of Patton's Third Army. These young men came from every corner of America, teenagers from humble Iowa farms, city dwellers from the tenements of New York, ranchers from Texas, and factory workers from California. They were the embodiment of the American spirit, diverse in that unwavering resolve embodied what Bastogne stood for, a spirit unbreakable in the face of tyranny and oppression. It was this indomitable attitude that sustained the defenders, that kept the line firm against overwhelming odds. It was this very spirit which prompted General Patton's formidable tanks to thunder across the snow-covered landscape, their engines roaring with relentless force, symbolizing resilience and determination. When the critical moment arrived, the stakes could not have been higher. When the very essence of freedom was hanging precariously in the balance, those brave souls responded with a single, powerful word that would resonate throughout history for eternity. That word was nuts. The mocking jeers of the German forces, designed to belittle and intimidate, faded into silence in the cold, snow-laden terrain surrounding Bastogne. Their derision was silenced beneath the relentless onslaught of Patton's advancing armored units, which cut through the winter's gloom with unstoppable momentum. At the same time, the courageous paratroopers, surrounded and vastly outnumbered, refused to surrender. Their unwavering refusal to give in, their unyielding spirit, transformed mere defiance into an act of profound heroism. As the battle drew to a close, the initial scorn from the enemy gradually gave way to respect, then admiration, and ultimately, genuine friendship forged in the crucible of combat. Bastogne's fortress of democracy had withstood the assault. Its resilient defenders had held firm against all odds. The success of their stand marked the triumph of the arsenal of freedom and victory that not only turned the tide of the conflict, but also secured the future of the free world. Through perseverance and courage, they ensured that the ideals of liberty and justice would endure, shining as a beacon of hope for generations to come.